Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today my guest is Neil Harvey, chairman of the state's former chairman of the States of Alderney Policy and Finance Committee, and now an important member of the Alderney Bird Observatory. Neil is going to give us his views on what needs to be done to kickstart Alderney. Wow, what can we say? Good to see you as ever.
And always a pleasure to see you, Tony. Once again, I have a sense of deja vu about these conversations. But then we could rename Alderney Deja Vu Island, couldn't
Well,
we, really?
somebody's got to hold somebody to account. I don't know. But can we first of all kick off, though, with a salute to John Horton, who's been the warden of the Bird Observatory for quite a while now, and he's moving on to fresher pastures.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we were all sorry to see the resignation from John, but he did explain to us that there were only two observatories in the British Isles that he would have left Alderney for. One was in the Fair Isle and almost up by the Arctic Circle. And I think his dear Lady Cass said, "There's no way I'm going up there." And the other one was Fair Isle. Sorry,
Yeah,
not Fair Isle. Was Cape Clear,
right.
off the southern coast of Ireland, which has been a very long established observatory, been going for a very long time. The warden had been there for a long time too, and sadly died last year. So there was an opportunity there for quite a unique location where they get lots of American birds blown across the Atlantic, rolling up in Cape Clear. So we totally understood. As a new observatory, we've never been in a position to pay him a proper living wage, and there we are. But I first met John down when I was on the States down at the nunnery, and he talked with such enthusiasm about the incredible variety and number of birds that pass through Alderney on an internationally recognized flyway. And I said, well, there's got to be a tourism angle to this. It was one of my
Mm.
portfolio at that time. You must come and talk to the States about it, which he duly did. And after 2 years working unpaid to record the birds and to get the observatory set up, we moved on as an independent organization. And John is a very charismatic speaker. I've fumbled my way through various Zoom calls that he's made and presentations he's made to birding clubs in the UK. And you can see there, and local people there as well, and you can see the fascination that he generates with the bird life here. So, obviously, we wish him very well. We're sorry to see him go. I think we've marked his passing in a couple of ways personally with him, and we expect to hear from him from time to time. Who knows? We might get to see one of his birds that he's ringed. It's always
You're,
possible.
Neil, how have you got a replacement underway? What's the procedure in terms of
We
recruitment?
have, we have advertised in various places, including social media and places that birders tend to look at. We're delighted to tell you that just in the past 2 or 3 days, we've appointed Matt Scragg, who many people will know as the assistant here for nearly 3 years. Last year, Matt went off to help with a wilding project in Poole Harbour, but he's again an extremely enthusiastic birder, very capable, has done a huge amount of ringing, and we think he will be very good to carry on the work that John and others have started. And we have also slightly strengthened our committee. So we now have Paul Veron, who many people in Alderney and in Guernsey will know, another enthusiastic birder, and he's joining us too, because I think it's fair to say that those of us on the board and the core of the committee wouldn't know one end of a skylark from the other. So we're thrilled to have some experienced birders guiding us in our deliberations. So I think we're well set for the future. We've just had a grant of almost £5,000 from Guernsey Social Investment Fund to properly set up a project called NOCMIG, which is nighttime recording of birds, because as they fly over our island, as anywhere else, they talk to each other. But the microphone, specialist microphones, we will have 2 of those set up to record the bird song. But the key to it really is some fairly recently developed software which turns those recordings into usable data. So that's yet another example of how we're trying to embrace technology to get more bang for our buck, so to speak.
Let's change the subject and still talk about people in the sky, not birds this time. Passengers, we hope. The connectivity or lack of it. And, I think we're seeing a failing airline. Public service obligation, I think, is renewed this year or next year. Where do you see the situation going, Neil, on this?
Well, it's obviously not a happy one. The problems with the runway. I was just looking back through some notes, and I found a note from 2016 and some earlier notes from a requête passed in Guernsey in 2014, in which all good intentions of Guernsey were stated, and subsequently some very specific proposals were put forward and agreed by Guernsey. At that stage, one of them was to spend £10 million on a basic refurbishment of the existing runway. And the only requirement, or the main requirement, was that no work should be done that would inhibit further development at a later date. And that is still, I guess, most sensible people's view as to what needs to be done.
But that's 11 years ago.
That was it. Yeah, oh yes, yeah. Absolutely. And I think the runway was past its sell-by date then.
Yeah,
yeah. And it's just been kicked down the road and down the road. Now, also I've got a note here. I wrote to somebody or other, quoting some CAA stuff which I've been advised about, and the CAA requirements for the Dornier, for example, we're just about okay on the length of the runway, but the width should be 23 meters, because they work not only on the length but a ratio of width to length. So when our runway was reduced to 18 meters of asphalt, always acknowledged as that, it was always that. This was only thanks to a dispensation by the then Director of Civil Aviation for the Channel Islands, who obviously works under instruction from the CAA in London.
Yeah.
We talked to him about it, and he said, well, I've talked to my friend in the CAA, and he has said to me, there are worse runways than yours, and bearing in mind this was over 10 years ago, worse runways than yours in the UK. So, it's not too bad, but most of those runways, of course, would not be carrying public transport, which obviously ours is.
That's the worry, isn't it?
I don't know how long the CAA are prepared to wait. The feeling amongst the aviation community is that they probably won't really get too heavy unless there's an incident. But if there is an incident here, which might be as trivial as running off the edge of the runway on a dark, stormy night, no danger to people. Please, let's hope for that. But that's the sort of incident that could cause the CAA to say, well, sorry, but your runway's closed to public transport. And then where are we? So, Guernsey have played a game with us. The cynic would say it's been a deliberate game of holding out a carrot and then taking it away, and then holding out a smaller carrot and taking that away, all of which has delayed the absolutely essential refurbishment of what's there at the moment.
In the meantime, the States of Alderney have said, oh, don't worry, old chap, we're putting £3 million towards whatever. Do you think the state showed their hand too soon?
Well, I'm not a poker player, so I'm not too sure about the timing on that. But I think they were desperately keen to get a longer, wider, all singing, all dancing runway. And, obviously, if you're in that situation and you have good reason to believe that's the way forward, then offering to have some skin in the game, as they say, to put some of Alderney's hard-fought money into it probably made a lot of sense. I don't think the whole project did, but that's a whole other matter. The priority now is to get a commitment to an early refurbishment of our runway, because of course the closure a week or so ago because it rained, and guess what, when it rains you get puddles, and
holes
holes in the runway, you get bigger puddles. And all of this is closely regulated in terms of flying. What condition the runway is in, whether it's wet, whether it's wet, and the landing distances are obviously, particularly on landings, are much greater when it's wet. So it's not a happy situation. So the priority, as I say, is to really get to grips with that, even if it's only going to 23 meters wide and resurfacing, properly resurfacing, not patching, digging out and resurfacing the full 800 odd meters. That's priority one. Priority two then is sorting out, where do we go from here on the air transport side itself?
Yeah, we'll come on to that in a moment, if we may. But I want to come back to Alderney and the fact that Guernsey have cut the subsidy that they give for flights between Alderney and Guernsey and Alderney and Southampton. It's going to cost about £1,000 for a family of four to come over, perhaps even more. It really is going to destroy the tourist industry, isn't it?
Well, you wonder whether it isn't a deliberate ploy. There used to be the old joke about how British Rail wanted to close their line. They'd run one train at 5 o'clock in the morning, and guess what?
Yeah.
People didn't use it. So we've got so few people on it, we might as well close the line. I think it was outrageous, frankly. I really do. Now I don't know exactly the ins and outs of it, as with so much that comes out of the Guernsey states. You never quite get the detail. But if Guernsey states the politicians, individual politicians, instructed Alderney to increase their fares by X amount, then surely they're acting as shadow directors, which you will know in the UK is an extremely perilous path.
Yeah.
I suspect they will merely say we're going to reduce your subsidy, so you'll have to put your fares up and leave it to you what you do. But it's a ludicrous level of fares, absolutely crazy, not sustainable, which is probably the idea, frankly, as much as cutting any losses in Alderney. So it's I think they're just driving Alderney out of Alderney for sure, and they're not too happy about them in Guernsey either these days, but that's a whole other matter.
We hear some really strange stories about planes, ATRs with about 20 people on board, but you're not going to make any money on any of those routes on that sort of basis. And I think I saw something today about the fact that they would have been profitable, but for the fact they had to wet lease aircraft and had some weather. Well, yeah, for God's sake, sure.
And the jet. Sure. And the jet.
Yeah, and repairing the jet. Repairing the jet. As a previous banker, you know what it's all about. You make provision for contingencies when you come up with budget, surely.
Well, absolutely. I mean, to say that, our losses would have been worse had we not got rid of the rusty jet, it's not much of a defence of the management, but there you go.
Anyway, I guess it's watch this space. But looking into a slightly more positive direction, the Alderney Transport Group have come up with some ideas. I did an interview with Roger Dadd just before Christmas, I think it was, and he explained it. What do you think about it as a concept?
Well, I've been aware of it because I have to declare my friendship with Rod Paris, who, as many people will know, used to run his own airline dealing with medical evacuations and what have you, with I think up to 10 aircraft, if memory serves me right. So, I also know Roger Dadd, though I don't know too much of his aviation background. So, you are dealing with people here who know quite a bit about aviation. All along, and Rod has mentioned this to me quite a long time ago, and all along my principal concern was the loss of the Alderney to Southampton route, which I still think would be pretty dreadful for Alderney. It might be less dreadful than having no air routes at all. And one wonders whether we're being softened up for that with all the things that have been happening with Alderney. But I think I know on the tourism side, when we had discussions years ago with Guernsey about mutual benefit we could derive from selling the archipelago of islands, the string of islands, whatever. They were all very positive of it. But you go to the tourist office and wander in and say, "Oh, can you tell me about trips to Alderney?" "Oh, you don't want to go there." "No, seriously was the response we were getting from, and they obviously, understandably, felt they were in competition with us.
Yeah.
Now, people have to fly to Guernsey to get to Alderney. It's going to beg the question, at least on the tourism side, how many of them will bother taking that extra leg probably waiting at the airport to come on to Alderney. And the other thing is too the notion, which in theory is very good, of a shuttle service, so that there are planes between Alderney and Guernsey every half hour, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
How long is that going to last when, the first few planes start coming in with one person on or nobody on? So promises of a regular shuttle service, one has to take with a considerable pinch of salt. If it happened, then it would at least be a reasonable compromise, in the face of losing our direct route to the UK. But that was my main concern. I know that others have looked at it and they say, who's going to buy these?
Yeah, that's another question, isn't it? Yeah.
I was, along with many other people, saw an example of them up at Alderney's airport quite a while ago now, and a very nice modern plane it is. Has the huge advantage over the piston-engined planes that the Twin Otters.
Yeah.
They're no longer made. They make a turboprop version, but they have, or they're assignees, but they no longer make piston engine planes, whereas the Tecnam is a piston engine. And my minimal knowledge of aircraft and the people who do know tells me that is really, the turboprop is quite inappropriate on short routes like ours. The maintenance costs are hideous. They're fine on 100 miles, 200 miles, whatever routes, but not on our 25, 26 miles down to Guernsey. So the Tecnam is available as a piston engine plane. The Twin Otter is not, other than second-hand ones, which spares will become increasingly difficult for. So the Twin Otter is seen by many as a cheaper option. Buy some second-hand Otters. And there's nothing wrong with the planes. I've flown with them on float plane versions and land planes, and they're perfectly adequate airplanes. But if you're running a service on an airplane that's no longer in production in that form, then you're already up against it in terms of spares and servicing.
You'd say that about the Dornier, though, Neil, can't you? Because that's not in production. They were more or less made on a bespoke basis for all really, weren't they?
Absolutely. But then looking back through my notes for 10, 12 years ago, with the Islanders, the much-loved Islanders, well past the end of their lifespan, and a replacement being urgently required, then, the Dornier at that time seemed like a decent option. Just goes to show you, make a decision, and 10 years later, the world has changed and the circumstances have changed. So it's not an easy one to go around. But I commend the guys, Roger Dad and
Malcolm Matthews and Rod. Yeah.
Rod. They've worked hard on this. And I believe none of them have any financial interest in this whatsoever.
No.
It's purely they're working at trying to find a solution for poor old Alderney.
Love of the island, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's come out of the air and get down to the sea. The Alderney ferry. I feel really sorry for them in terms of the fact that the states took ages to come up with licenses. The licenses are short term, aren't they? It's not exactly making people too enthusiastic about investing money if you're only going to get a 1 or a 2 year license each time.
Yeah, well, I think it's unfortunately it's typical political short-termism. I think they've done a good job in the past. I think the new ferry, the catamaran, the large catamaran, I don't know what the business plan was based upon. But insofar as it could only carry 12 as it was currently configured and licensed, or to be licensed, the running cost must have been significantly higher than the small boats they'd used hitherto. And it is big, the new one, and hence their decision, I think, to put turn them on the market.
I'll tell you what.
We've not helped with licensing. I don't think people should underestimate the requirement on licensing, because it's not just like issuing a dog license or a car license or a driving license. Clearly, the states has to be responsible in terms of the operators, how they're operating it, the safety of the operation, and in particular, something that you've alluded to in your notes, the safety of landing people.
Yeah, absolutely.
From the boats, which I guess has been a bit better with the pontoon that's gone in. At least that's the one that doesn't sink so far, touch wood. I don't think it's just a rubber stamping exercise, in fairness to the states.
No, it's a commitment though that they don't seem to want to get involved with the states. In terms of saying, well, you can have it for 2 or 3 years, subject to an annual review or something like that.
Well, that would seem a reasonable way forward, and as you say, give some assurance to investors and the people running the ferry business. What the states, why the states have gone for just a 1 year, whether they've considered a longer period, I don't know. That's something no doubt you will ask one of the politicians if we've got any left.
If I can ever get any. If I can ever
get any. You have to make do with the old retreads like us.
Yeah. Well, I think some of the retreads do pretty well, yourself included, of course. One thing that does concern me, and you mentioned it just now about this question about landing, old people are having to climb up vertical ladders to get off the boat and get onto the quay. That's not on. Now, if somebody gets injured, falls off the ladder, where does the liability lie? The operator or the states of Alderney for providing insufficient gear?
I think it would be a lawyer's field day after that.
I do as well.
A lawyer to advise you on it.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to say, if the states have not got proper provision, if they license a service, but they have not got proper provision for landing them, and the pontoon was okay, the new pontoon they put in was okay. The ladders were an abysmal, thought, an accident waiting to happen for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that the states would have to bear some responsibility. Now, we always have to bear in mind that UK law as such, with all its bells and whistles, doesn't always apply here, because in the UK, of course, they introduced the idea of corporate manslaughter and corporate liability, and individuals running corporations, businesses, what have you, could be made personally liable for failures, negligence that led to the death or injury to their customers. And I think morally, that would be the situation here. I mean, if the harbour is providing a service in terms of landing people, for which, of course, it charges normally, there are harbour dues, and so they're charging for a service. And if they're not making adequate provision, safe provision, then they really should be thinking about their personal liabilities on something like that. But as I say, the pontoon that was put in for landing the ferries last year, I think was reasonably okay. Okay, there's still a march up the gangway.
That's all right.
Yeah, but that's okay. Well, but for most of us, yes, unless you arrive at low water and you've got a lot of
But I mean, I've got a friend who had to carry her 3-year-old son up the ladder. I mean, probably 10, 15, 20 feet or something like that. Yeah. Just crazy.
You can't use vertical ladders for a public service obligation.
Of course you can't.
It doesn't take an Einstein to work out that's a crazy notion. So
right.
We shall wait and see. But springtime comes around and seems to catch the harbour unprepared. Always a surprise when spring comes around.
Let's get on to the states of Alderney themselves. What about this States Economic Development Committee? It appears to be toothless, and you can't do anything unless you've got some money to throw around, can you?
Well, again, I look back to my old notes, and one of the few things that Robert McDowell and I achieved with Guernsey was an acceptance that out of the Gambling Commission money, the Alderney's Economic Fund should receive 300,000 of that year, but on a roll-up basis, which was vitally important. Otherwise, in typical local authority terms, you don't spend it, you don't get it. But that was on the basis we'd have 300,000 a year of that money would be ours as of right. It didn't stop Guernsey, of course, still trying to control the capital expenditure program by ask us, and we'll think about whether we want to let you do it. But there's not a great deal of money there. I mean, I think on a wider issue, obviously the states is in a bit of an interregnum at the moment. I think not just the states, but the bailiwick. Here we've got a situation with only states members, which hopefully in a month or so's time will be put right, depending on how many come forward. Guernsey obviously is facing elections in a few months' time, in June, I believe. So they won't be wanting to take any long-term views, which in Guernsey is probably about a month hence. Never mind, 3, 4, 5 years hence. So, there's a bit of a stasis, really, if you like, at the moment politically, I think, in both islands. And the top of my agenda would be this continuing issue of the runways. But how we go on from here, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how many candidates we get for the 2 vacancies that have arisen. One would hope there will be a few, at least, to give the electorate a bit of a choice rather than people being appointed to the states rather than elected. But the system doesn't work. We know the system doesn't work. The need for urgent change, the missed opportunity last autumn with a proposal to change the electoral cycle to just once every 4 years.
That said it all, didn't it?
Such an open goal that was waiting there. It wouldn't have transformed Alderney's politics, but it would have been a good start.
Step in the right direction.
Absolutely, and yet, it was rejected by, unfortunately, several members for reasons that are best known to themselves. So that was one. The other issue, of course, is that of the top committee, and whether everybody should be on it. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, my idea of policy and finance was that it should be a restricted committee. They should be there to develop ideas and to put the ideas to the whole of the states so that every state's member had a stake in it, for or against. Obviously, maybe sounding them out along the way, at least to get a view of whether it was a doable policy.
And do that in the presence of the public, Neil. Do that in the presence of the public, not, behind closed doors.
Yes. There's still far too much stuff is hidden. I find myself from time to time having to look at minutes of states meetings to try and find out what's happening on matters that affect us, and it is damn
confidential.
Absolutely. I tried when I was in the States to get the civil service in particular and others to accept that the default position should be reported. And the confidentiality should be saved for very specific circumstances. But unfortunately, politicians and these days senior civil servants generally prefer the default position to be don't tell people in case we got it wrong.
That always, of course, assumes that you've got a chief executive officer available. So the average is getting worse and worse, isn't it, in terms of how long they stay?
We have been remarkably careless with them, haven't we, you might say?
Lady Bracknell would not have been happy.
To have lost so many over such a short period of time. I bumped into Roy Burke about 2 months ago, who many people will remember.
Number 2.
He reminded me that he was the last person to be actually appointed by the Lieutenant Governor on an open-ended contract. I thought they were all fixed term, but he tells me no, his was open-ended. But then he took himself off the delights of St. Helena for a while. But
to discover which way the wind blew.
Yes. Well, I think they'd known that since at least, the Victorian times. But that didn't bother the civil servants in London, who decided, we'll have a runway here, even though it's gale force crosswind.
Yeah, I think we should just tell the audience. Apparently, the runway was in the wrong direction, wasn't it?
Well, it was, and they found to their dismay after they spent, I can't remember how many tens of millions, I think it was, building a runway. The first runway is St. Helena, which, let's admit it, is a pretty mountainous looking place, but they found a flat bit and they said, we'll put a runway down here. And when they spent all the money, and I think they ran one trial flight, and the poor pilot on the trial flight must have aged 20 years in one attempted landing. And then, of course, everybody reached for the history book since the days of sail, when people went there and said, God, this is a windy day. Never thinking about an airport there. So they built it in totally the wrong place. And now they have very special arrangements for people. It's a long flight from anywhere to get to St. Helena.
That's right. Absolutely. Anyway, getting back to Alderney.
We haven't got that problem
What happened to the big year for Alderney in 2024? We're going to deal with environment, economy, energy, care, housing, education and transport.
What was supposed to happen, Tony?
Well, I think it was all going to sort of go forward and, become wonderful.
Yes.
And it didn't.
Well, I'm scratching my head trying to think what
What
progress we've made
actually
there.
happened? Well, I suppose putting the sewerage system in down at Saline after, God knows how many years, that was an achievement. But I can't
Well,
really think of any other achievements last year.
no. Well, I've been on the island 20 plus years now, and I've been waiting for most of that time for the sewer to come down Wide Lane outside where I'm sitting now. And it's not
That's
there
an
yet.
achievement. That's, well, it's nearly.
We're told it's coming. We're told it's coming. Funnily enough, we were talking about water the other day, because that is probably one of the few projects the States has undertaken over the last 20 odd years that everybody who drinks water, other than the bottle sort, thinks was a success.
Yeah.
And it's good that it was a success, because I'm sure many of your older viewers will remember shrimps coming out of the
Oh,
taps
definitely.
of
Yeah.
very easy
Yeah.
groundwater.
Yeah.
So I suppose it proves one thing: it is possible to run an infrastructure project in Alderney and get it right. Now, why everything else since then seems to have gone wrong or been put on hold, I really don't know. I mean, one despairs. I came to Alderney and loved the place and thought, well, I quite understand the view. We don't want to turn it into Wandsworth or some suburb of London, and the annoyance the local people feel when somebody comes and wants to turn it into that sort of an environment. But that's no excuse for not having the basic infrastructure right. And the potholes, of course, are growing deeper now, not just on the runway, but in the roads as well.
How many years is it since we've seen Rone over? They're the contractors in Guernsey that come over or used to come over on a regular basis.
But I think a bit like the runway, it's been put off and put off. And
Yeah.
there was certainly, I've heard the view expressed by politicians that, when somebody comes in to do the runway, that would be a good time for them to do the roads as well. Well, I'm no civil engineer, but I would have thought the requirements are rather different for those two things.
Me too. But once again, we pay for these things, don't we, in increased petrol prices, which was supposed to be hypothecated to road maintenance. And we don't see any result. And apparently the money's been there for, I don't know how long, ages. From your experience as chairman of P&F, what happens to the money? I mean, if you got 600 grand for the roads, okay, it's not physically there, is it, in the bank?
No, I mean, my knowledge, I say, is woefully out of date, Tony. You probably time you pension me off from these, but
no, we need you. We need you.
But no, I mean, every significant project had to go through Guernsey for approval, even if the money was there, either voted by Guernsey or as part of our famous Economic Development Fund. We still had very little control over any money ourselves, which I think is a shame. But one can understand that the nervousness in Guernsey Treasury about what those people in Alderney might do with the money if they were given. So no, it's probably not sitting in a little pot somewhere. One of the problems that Alderney, like all small jurisdictions, has is project management, because although you will have foremen and people in charge of the contractors, as the one who's paying the whole bill and requiring it the project to be completed on time and within budget, that famous mantra, you need people in the States who are capable of running a project like that. And the people we've had have come and gone, some of them. I mean, I think we have a man now who's head of projects, or you probably know better than I do, who everybody says is an excellent chap and will be very good. But we do need that. We do need strong project management in the States. Unless, of course, we throw our lot totally in with Guernsey, as has often been mentioned, and we become not exactly a parish of Guernsey, but an extension of Guernsey, because I don't think Alderney would wish to lose its total independence to become a parish. I don't think Guernsey would want to pay what it would have to pay to give us exactly the same services as Guernsey, particularly with 20 odd miles of sea in between us. But I think, for the size of the island, we do ask a lot of our states and the civil service, to be fair.
Yeah.
We joke about them a great deal, but it's not an easy job. We have people with bags of good intention. Sometimes they have technical knowledge which is valuable. The states have often sought to enroll that technical knowledge and advertise for people with particular skills, but it's usually come to nothing very much.
Yeah.
I know there have been discussion, as have Guernsey, with Roger Dadd and Rod and Malcolm about the Air Links thing. So they have gained a sort of coherence as a group of experts, as it were. But no, the problems for the states are not easy ones. One would think that filling in the holes in the road ought to be a simple matter. To you and I, never having had to do it, I guess. At least I haven't. I assume you haven't.
No, I gave up potholing a long time ago.
But
I mean, we see the same problem in England, don't we? Really, in terms of potholes and things like
absolutely.
that. It's
and
not
they
just
probably
Alderney,
project managers coming out of ears. But I think that, people here would feel a lot happier in many respects. Yes, of course, we have to deal with the big issues: connectivity, airfield, airport. But they do feel that maybe the states could actually deal with some of the more local, not trivial because they're important to us, but more local infrastructure matters that it doesn't take a genius to sort out, like the potholes and the state of the roads.
Neil, I'm sorry to have to say we've run out of time. That went
Well,
quick, didn't it?
I'm sorry. I'm sure there's a whole lot more subjects we could talk about.
Well, we'll do a part 2 later. We'll do another one later on in the year. Always appreciate you coming on, and I really am grateful to you for letting us have your views on things. So
it's a pleasure. It's a
meantime,
pleasure.
take care, okay, and keep in touch. Thank you, Neil.
Absolutely, and you too.